Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll probably have more people coming through, and I'll keep letting them in. But it is noon, so I wanted to go ahead and get moving for today's webinar. So we've got Dr. Jamie Daugherty, and she is the Urban Forestry FFL agent from Sumter County. And so up in Central Florida, where there's a lot of urban forest pressure and a lot of expansion of urban areas. And so we're going to get some interesting perspectives where these two things, this UF Florida Friendly Landscape program and their principles collide with urban forestry. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off here to Dr. Daugherty.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you all today. And we're going to go through all of the Florida Friendly Landscape principles and really look at how they're directly related to urban forestry. And if you're in the profession, you'll look at this and say, oh, yeah, I've just never really thought of them as being related. So I'm going to start. I'll occasionally through this presentation, we'll ask you guys questions that you can write in the chat. So the first question is, how do you think urban forestry connects to Florida friendly landscaping? And if you don't know what Florida friendly landscaping is, that's okay. The next slide, I'm going to tell you all about it. Just giving a couple seconds for chatting. Yep. So we are looking at conserving water. So one of the main reasons that we're planting in trees in urban settings for a lot of their benefits. And one of those benefits is helping to reduce water runoff, especially when you're the larger municipalities. We don't want to completely fill the sewage systems. So they do have similar goals. So for those that aren't specifically knowledgeable on Florida friendly landscape principles, there are 9. We will be going over all 9. We have right plant, right place, water efficiently, fertilize appropriately, mulch, attract wildlife, manage yard pests responsibly, recycle yard wastes, reduce stormwater runoff, and protect the waterfront. And I noticed a comment in the chat just now that native and well-adapted species are more resilient. Yes, one thing though that I was just at several conferences, and one of the conferences I was at, there was a whole presentation about natives in urban landscapes and the fact that natives are well adapted to our natural landscapes, but they're not necessarily well adapted to our urban landscapes. And they're doing research to figure out which one of our natives are best in our landscapes so that we can work on producing those more. So I thought that was just an interesting fact because we've always told people, natives are better adapted, but with the changes we do to soils in our urban settings, in our urban landscapes, they're not necessarily all the best adapted. So we're trying to figure out which ones are the most resilient in urban landscapes. All right, so looking at this more closely, we're going to get into right plant, right place. And to do right plant, right place, it's a little bit of detective work, right? We have to look at a lot of different things to select the plant for the location rather than just grab a plant and stick it in. And when we're doing like large scale urban tree planting initiatives, a lot of times it'll just be what's available and maybe the entirety of that investigative process doesn't work. So I'm going to start at the nursery and we're going to talk about all of the things you have to do for right plant, right place. This is our longest of our principles today. So as with any plant, it's going to start from where the plant is coming from. And the larger your initiative is in urban forestry, the more likely you are going to have direct contact with your nursery growers. So you want to think about, are you getting a good tree? Right? Depending on your location, you're going to want a Florida Fancy or a Florida Grade 1, especially in urban settings. We want to make sure the tree is structured in a way that ensures continued urban compatibility as that tree grows. And what I mean by urban compatibility is it structured so that we can lift for clearance and that so we can reduce for clearance well? And some of them, the ones I see that are getting planted, aren't structured, but that's going to be an easy thing to do over the course of the tree's life. So when I talk about Florida Fancy and Grade 1, that's related to the Florida Grades and Standards. There's a whole manual on that. We could do a whole presentation just on grades and standards. I'm just going to do a quick introduction to the fancy and the number one for what you're really looking for. So fancy basically means we have a single straight leader, right? The lateral branches, or the branches coming out of the side, are about 2/3 the diameter of that central leader. We don't have any open injuries, cuts. During leaf season, like spring, you will have a full crown. This particular tree, it was fall, and it's deciduous species, doesn't have leaves, but it was really great to look at that central leader structure. Okay. The correct root ball size. So in the manual that you can get for that, it's free online. It will tell you what root ball size based on the caliper of the tree or the container size is required. And you don't want to have a root ball that's too small for your tree. You're not going to have a good root structure then. And you want those branches to be evenly distributed. So what's good about this when you have something, when we're talking urban compatibility, I'm getting my laser. I'm going here. As this tree grows, you can trim these off and they have nice branch attachments. You're going to get good cuts. So as this grows, you trim these to get the clearance that you need depending on where you're at. All right, so the next level down would be a Florida number one. So it's not perfect, but it can be. So you have mild pruning requirements for some structural issues potentially that could take it up to a Florida fancy. You might have some minor trunk damage, but nothing that's going to really negatively impact the tree's health. You could have a double leader near the top, excuse me, and I'll show you that on the next slide. You could also have branches that are equally dominant that you're going to have to do reductions to not have that. Also, certain tree species would only be able to ever be a one. They wouldn't be a fancy based on just the habit of the tree. When we have things that are multi-trunk species that naturally have more than one kind of dominant stem, we have to consider what is available in the species we're looking for as well. Okay. And then you could have some foliage missing, but again, it's still in pretty good shape. So what do I mean by double leaders near the top? So when we look near the top of the tree, we might see two different leaders. And really on this one too, we can see this is also a potential codominant leader. So we have two different sets of those up there that as it grows, we could end up having some kind of issues like this where we have a branch that's almost the same size as the leader going up. And that's not ideal when we're looking at urban settings. So by knowing that, we can trim those as the tree's young so we have a better structure as that tree grows. A lot of the issues we see now in urban forestry comes from bad urban forestry practices 20 plus years ago. And we all know trees live for a long time. So what we do now impacts that tree for decades to come. Now, I will also mention a number two. Number twos are generally a lot more misshapen. They have major crown issues. There's long-term management requirement to try to fix an issue. And it would be one, if I was planting a large scale project of street trees, I would not be picking number twos. They're already going to have a hard enough life there. You can have a double leader near the bottom of the canopy, which we can see over here. And then we can see on the other side what that can look like as it gets larger. And then eventually that's going to lead to included bark issues and potential failure of the tree. We can have dog legs, which if you've ever looked at the back of a dog, it's going to be over here. This is an example of a dog leg. You don't want that in a young tree at all. And most branches could be vertical and you can have large voids in the crown. So it's just not a good tree for urban compatibility. They might be perfectly fine trees in native natural restoration areas where they're out in the woods. So if you're looking for trees in the woods versus trees in an urban setting, what you're looking at in grades and standards could vary. So once you've worked on getting your tree and making sure that your tree's healthy, you really need to do some site analysis so you can figure out what your site is at. So first you want to look at space. You want to look at utilities, both above and below ground. Is there room for the canopy and the roots to grow based on utilities in that area? We don't want the roots to grow into utilities as a problem, just like we don't want the canopy to grow up in utilities as a problem. And we've all gotten kind of accustomed to air conditioning and refrigerators. So if the trees start having a problem with the above ground utilities, we do get the beautiful cuts like we see here that a lot of people don't like, but that's what's needed to make sure that we're still getting that electricity. So ideally, don't plant trees 20 feet from power lines, and that helps avoid this. Now we're in the planning process, and when we're looking at utilities, we can actually look at them on site plans. So the next site plan, it's a little hard to read, but I'm going to walk you through all of it. And if anybody here has site plans that would work better for this presentation for me that I could use, I would much appreciate it. But when we're looking at our site plans, we don't want to just look at the placement of the trees in relation to each other. We want to look at the placement of the trees in relation to infrastructure to make sure that tree species is far enough away. But we can also look, and we're looking at overhead power lines and the right of way for that power line. So I know this one is a bit confusing, but we have all the round circles here. These are trees. This is a parking lot. So this is a grass bed. That's the planting bed. This dotted line in the middle is a utility line. And based on looking at the easement, we've got 20 feet. This is a transmission utility line. Okay. And we've got a 20-foot easement on each side. Now, you need to be aware of when you're looking at plans and you're thinking utility lines. First off, if it's mid-span, that has a higher sag chance. So like the sag, when it's a hot day and you have a lot of electricity going through it, it's going to dip further down. So center, you'd have to be stuck with very, very small trees, nothing more than 12 feet tall in that location. This particular plan doesn't tell me what these are, but these being in the middle of that right of way give me a bit of a red flag because I'm saying, I don't know if I can keep these here. So work with the utilities because they may also have regulations that say they're not allowed to have anything there. With transmission lines, you're not allowed to have anything permanently planted that gets above 12 feet tall at adulthood. But again, that might not work in mid-span because of how low some of these can dip. It really depends on how tall the poles are. But not just in this right-of-way, we also want to look at the edge because we see this edge, the utility has the right to clear that entire edge. So we're wanting to think, okay, well, if we're planting these trees, can we pull it back? If we're keeping those trees there, do we need to go ahead and trim them up? Do you need the utility to come out and give you a hand with that? So you want to look and really think ahead of time so you want proactive rather than reactive is ideal. So if you've already gone through and you've put things in the ground and you're putting new plants in and the buildings are already there, you want to think about space. So you want to think about, again, how much root space is necessary and then also how much crown space is necessary. So here's another question for you. We've got 3 crepe myrtles here. They're planted along the street. There's 4 feet of shrubs and then at least 5 feet of sidewalk before you get to the building. So my question is, was this pruning job necessary for above ground clearance of this building? I'm not asking for above ground clearance of the road right now, just the building. So we'll see if anybody writes in the chat for a second. All right, so crepe myrtles often are overly pruned in an unnecessary fashion. You can just let them grow. Crepe myrtles, depending on the variety, can be anywhere between 1 and 30 plus feet tall. So it's important to know the variety of plant you put in, and again, that maximum size. So yeah, I would agree with John in the chat. No, this pruning wasn't necessary. Now, may we needed to prune a little bit more on the roadside for clearance of trucks? Yes, because these are too close to the road for car clearance. So these would have been better off offset a little bit further back and maybe had slightly smaller shrubs in there to make room for the tree to avoid that maintenance. So what we can do when we're like thinking of this and planning, we can really avoid maintenance costs in the future if we do it right at the beginning. Now, if you're thinking, well, I don't know how much space these plants need. Well, we did have a UF publication. This isn't currently available. They're working on some edits for it, but I want to show you just some basics. So we did have one problem with this where some people were using it to say we need to remove plants because there's not enough space, but that's not what this is for. If you have an issue with a sidewalk, there's ways to work around it. This is meant for planning new planting locations and what you need to consider. So here are some of them. So what we have, they used really historically large trees to figure out the maximum genetic potential. I went ahead and just pulled a section of oaks to look at. So maximum genetic potential, you're really only going to get that in the best habitat. You've got no infrastructure around it, and you can get really, really large trees. We're looking more at 25 to maybe 75% maximum potential in most urban settings, and how stressful that setting is going to dictate how big it's going to get. Now, when we say 25%, for example, here, 25% of genetic potential means it can get to 25% of its maximum size before you're going to have to remove or do some sort of mitigation because of infrastructure issues. So if you want to give it the best chance, you want to give it the most space. So let's just look for a second. If you're looking at Quercus virginiana, it's our southern live oak, one of the most popular urban trees that gets planted. Planting distance is how far the tree has to be away from infrastructure to any side of it. The width is the width from one side to another that the tree is planted in the center of. So for 25% of the genetic potential, a live oak tree has to be, the trunk needs to be 6 feet away from infrastructure on all sides, and the total bed size needs to be at least 13 feet wide. Okay. So if we look at that 50%, we're looking at 9 feet in all directions, 17 feet wide. So at this point, we can already start visualizing the lawn, like the lawn beds in parking lots, and know most of those are too small for the live oaks planted, right? 75%, you're looking at the trunk being 11 feet away in all directions, with the planting bed being 22 feet wide. And then if you want the maximum genetic potential in an urban setting, you would have to make sure that trunk at planting was at least 13 feet from all infrastructure on all sides, and the planting bed was 27 feet. So if you're looking at a planting location and you don't have this kind of space, you need a different tree. So you need to really think about how much space there is and then pick your tree species based on that. All right, you also want to think about other species when you're planting. So how do the other species grow that can impact it? And right here we can see that we've got palm trees that are starting to bend over because they're trying to get away from that oak to get light. You really shouldn't plant palm trees that are, already 20 feet tall right next to a live oak. It can be different if you're planting them young and they're adapting in the shady environment, but if they're adapted already for full sun, you're going to get some weird growth happening. Now, in urban settings, we also need to consider light. We consider light everywhere, but when we're thinking urban settings, we have to think about light reflection and blocking within the buildings. So it might look like on paper on that plan that there's a great place for a tree to be planted, but because of the angle of the sun, where the building is, the height of the building, it might not actually get enough sun for the plant you selected. You may have to pick something that's actually quite shade tolerant, or not even plant there at all, just because you don't have the light resources necessary for that plant to grow. And right now, I'll mention that I actually used to work New York City for the New York City Parks Department in the street tree planting division, and we had to consider this constantly when we were planting on. We had to go out at different times of day to see what's the light look like. Is this going to actually work? So we also want to think about our soil. There's a lot of considerations in soil. So I mentioned New York. This is actually a tree bed in New York when I was working up there walking around. And I can tell right now that, somebody's driven up in this. So we have to think about, possible car damage for street trees. But when you're planting in urban areas, you never know what you're digging into. I was planting at a city not too far from here in Central Florida, where they dug out, and about 2 feet down, they hit an old road that was over 100 years old. So they pulled all of that material out, and now they didn't have enough native backfill, so they had to go buy more material, but they hadn't planned on that because you never know what's going to be down there. Sometimes there's nothing. But within your soil in urban settings, we do want to check the drainage. So if you're needing to check drainage, you can dig a hole, put a meter stick in it, fill it with water, and you're really just watching how much time it takes for it to drain. If you still have water in there, at about 30 minutes, you're starting to deal with not great drainage. In an hour, it's not particularly good drainage either. And you need to know that because some trees do well in poorly drained soils and some trees would not. And you don't want to put something in there in standing water that's not going to survive. I've had that happen up here too, where I was told, oh, they pulled out a tree that died and it was in standing water. That would not be a great planting location. You also want to think about that soil volume, and that just goes to making sure that the roots have enough space to grow and to get the nutrients they need from that soil. Within that soil volume, you want to make sure there's enough root space. We don't want to be planting things and then going back and cutting roots, because then this is going to happen. So we want to make sure, again, we have space for these plants to grow. And this was, yeah, a windstorm came through and knocked this over. If you look at it, you can see that the sidewalk looks relatively new. So it was cut on, the roots were cut on three sides. And then because of the compaction on the road, there were no roots really growing out there. So it was just a matter of time and really a vigorous sneeze almost to this tree falling over. Now, when we're also thinking about soil, you want to be aware of your pH. Some trees, plants do better in certain pHs. And when we're dealing with palms, it can be vitally important. We actually have a problem up here with boron deficiency because our soil pH is quite high, which results in some boron absorption issues. So be aware of what pH the plants you're working with need so that you can put appropriate plants in. It is a lot easier to put the right plant in the pH rather than try to change that pH, because it takes a long time to change soil pH and a lot of organic matter for that to work out. And the last one is just being aware of your climate zone and not planting things that are outside of their zone. In my area, a lot of the issues we had in our freeze in this area were due to plants that were outside of their zone, or they were in the very, very northernmost part of the zone and it just got too cold for them. So be aware of your hardiness zone and plant accordingly. All right, so moving on to our second Florida-friendly landscape principle, it's watering efficiently. And there's a lot of things we can do here. So one thing is to remember, irrigation is a supplement to rainfall, but at the same time, especially newly planted trees require more water than other plants in your landscape, okay? And you're going to have to supplement water for trees during this establishment phase. And there's lots of different methods to go through to do this. So few things that there was a research project done recently that looked at three methods. One was hand watering, one was tree gators, and one was tree diapers. And tree diapers is kind of what it sounds like. The material is similar to what is in a diaper. So hand watering was found to be the best, but it was time consuming. It requires minimal equipment, no cost of installation, but then you have labor accumulation, and then trying to get water out to trees can be an issue. Tree gators were not bad. They were still great. They are costly. You put them in, you do still have to manage to get water out to them, filling them up. Sometimes people will think they're trash bags and put trash in them. And if the person doesn't know how to use the gator bag correctly, that could be a problem. I've also seen issues with girdling when they've been left on too long. Realistically, they're designed to put on when you water and take off when you're not. And I know in most settings in urban locations, we don't do that. But if you are using them, you put your hose underneath that little white flap. So this little white flap right here, you put your hose under there, put some water in it and shake it so you make sure the holes at the bottom are flat, and then fill it up. And you can get them in 10, 20, and multiple different sizes. So get the size that you need. Now, tree diapers are a relatively new product on the market, and the research actually found them to be quite efficient, but they are highly expensive. But what you do with these is you soak them for, I think it was like 24 hours, and then you put them on the ground, you cover them in soil. Over time, that slowly releases water into the soil, and then anytime it rains or irrigation happens, it refills it and it slowly releases again. But they were finding, at least with the initial results, that the tree diaper actually had the best established roots, but all of them were really comparable. Now, when you're watering, we got to talk about palms too. Make sure your irrigation isn't hitting things that aren't meant to be water. Now, you should not be watering the trunk of any tree species. The woody plants don't like it. Palms don't necessarily care, but they could potentially start growing roots, which people generally don't like for aesthetic reasons. There's no health issue with this palm right here, but a lot of people don't like that. And this is directly caused by lawn irrigation hitting it constantly. Now, I did mention that trees require more irrigation. Now, this chart is for woody plant species. So when we're talking about trees, we have our caliper size. So caliper is measured about 6.5 inches up from the ground with the root flare showing, so a properly planted tree, and how large that is. When we're getting things from a nursery, we're usually talking caliper or container size, but even with container size, they should tell you caliper. And this chart is showing you how much water you need per irrigation session, and then how many years it takes for full root establishment. And as we can see, a lot of times in urban settings, we'll pick 3, 4, or more inch caliper trees, which is great, but look how many years it takes to establish. And oftentimes, after 1, maybe 2 years, we quit watering them. So the larger the tree, the longer the commitment for actual watering. But again, planting the larger tree does give you more bang for the buck. You get that more established look right away, but to keep it, you do need to maintain it. And the smaller plants take less time because, they're smaller. It's going to be quicker to get the number of roots required to maintain that particular tree. Just as a general reminder, you should not water between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. When you do that, about 60% of the water is evaporated through the sun. And also, a lot of plants will close their stomata. And by closing stomata, that effectively shuts off photosynthesis. And by shutting off photosynthesis and the stomata, water is not being pulled up through the plants. So the water is just sitting in the soil and percolating down, and often not available when the plants kind of wake up again as the temperatures cool down. So watering in the morning, watering in the evening is less effective. It's more of a, if you have a stressed out plant, but watering in the morning is really best to be most efficient. So our next one is fertilizing appropriately. So we do recommend a soil test to get a baseline of where the soil is for fertilization. It is possible to over-fertilize and have plants experience toxicity from your fertilization, and we don't want to do that. So only apply fertilizer during growing seasons. Don't apply fertilizer when things are dormant. Like if you have a tree that's completely defoliated for the winter, you are wasting time and money, and you're just going to get nutrient runoff if you're fertilizing at that point in time. You want to use some kind of broadcast spreader. You want a deflector shield to make sure your fertilizer is going where it needs to be. Okay. Now I want to mention too, the only plant in your landscape that I recommend fertilizing on a specific schedule are your palms. Palms, when they start to show a nutritional issue, when you fertilize them again, those leaves don't get better looking. You're just helping to fertilize and make the new leaves look good. And depending on how bad that nutritional issue is, it can take years for that palm to look good again. So making sure that you're fertilizing 3 to 4 times a year with the appropriate fertilizer. You want an A212 plus 4 spread evenly under the entire canopy of the palm. And if you're doing trees, it's the same thing. The entire canopy, not a little ring around the base. That's not where fertilizer is going to be effective. Now, a couple of things just as little reminders. So when you're diagnosing nutritional deficiencies, and these are really here so that you can pause the video and look at them and have them as a bit of a resource. But certain deficiencies show up in older versus newer leaves. So if we zoomed in a little bit on the old leaves, you're going to have issues with nitrogen, phosphorus, magnesium, and potassium. And then on your newer leaves, you're going to see more with boron. You can still get calcium, copper, sulfur, zinc, iron, and manganese. And we do see manganese, boron, and magnesium deficiencies quite frequently in our palms, at least in the area where I'm at. So this is just looking a little bit closer at leaves are distorted or necrotic. So there's some sort of weird growth abnormality or they're dying back. And that's going to be your boron, calcium, and copper. And then chlorotic, they're turning yellow. So you have sulfur, zinc, iron, and manganese in those new leaves. So again, apply only when needed for everything in your landscape except a palm. And apply appropriate amounts. Look at the bag you're applying and find out what rate is needed for the size of plant that you're fertilizing and apply that rate correctly. So if it says, I'm going to go with palms again, 1.5 pounds per 100 square feet under the canopy, measure the canopy, determine how many square feet, and plan 1.5 pounds per 100 square feet. So if you have 200 square feet, you're putting 3 pounds down under that entire canopy, water it in with about 1/4 inch of water. That helps to reduce the chance of nitrogen off-gassing and you losing it into the atmosphere, and helps just kind of get it in the soil where the roots can start to get it. Don't fertilize if it's going to be raining within significantly raining within 24 hours. Okay. Um, and again, appropriate irrigation and amounts based on the label. And don't fertilize hard surfaces. Don't irrigate hard surfaces. I know it seems like development's really quick, but watering and fertilizing concrete doesn't pop buildings up. We want to keep that in our landscapes. Now, when we're looking at trees, we do want to do, again, that drip line. So your drip line is going to be the area underneath the canopy. So it's kind of called that because if it rains and then you stand under this after it's rained, you can still get dripped on. So you want to go ahead and put that fertilizer out here. You can go further than that, but you want minimum underneath your canopy. Now, with palms, you want to avoid turf fertilizer on palms because turf fertilizer is very high in nitrogen and it pushes green growth. And by putting that on palms, it pushes new growth and increases the chance of nutritional deficiencies in other areas. So palm fertilizer has everything turf needs, but turf fertilizer doesn't have everything palms need. So if you have a palm in your turf, use palm fertilizer in that area rather than turf. All right. So mulching is up next. So there's a few different types of mulch. I want to talk about inorganic and organic. So, and when to kind of use each. So inorganic mulch can impact soil temperatures. It can also change soil pH over time because rocks break down, and part of the creation of soil is the breakdown of rocks. And depending on the stones that you're using, you could increase your soil pH. It doesn't suppress weeds on its own, and this is actually not considered Florida friendly in landscaping to have rocks around your plants within the landscape. It can be great for paths and certain aesthetics, but we definitely recommend more of the organic fertilizer actually around your plants. Now, some benefits of gravel and rock is that it is long lasting, it's low maintenance. It's easy to see when something's coming up that you can take care of it. Oftentimes, people will put that weed barrier down. But really, this is best suited for xeriscaping or decorative zones. And xeriscaping is a landscape principle that works best out west in incredibly dry, arid climates, which is not what we have in Florida. We are very much humid down here, and xeriscaping isn't something that should be a landscape goal in Florida. Okay. Now, we also have rubber mulch. This is from recycled tires. It can be used if done correctly in certain places, but it absorbs heat, it leaches toxins, it doesn't really suppress weeds, and can significantly increase the soil temperature. So we don't recommend this in landscapes around plants either. What we do recommend are organics. Organics mean they were once alive. Most common ones that we find are pine bark, pine straw, wood chips, fallen leaves. And benefits of this is as they decompose, they're helping to enrich the soil. So if you're trying to permanently change your pH, using organic mulches is one of the better ways to do it. Things to keep in mind, anything from a pine can help decrease your pH. So if you're not trying to decrease your pH, you might want to avoid those. Okay. So we do have other benefits that it is keeping the soil warm in the winter, cooler in the summer. It slows evaporation and helps to hold that moisture in place. It's going to reduce maintenance when done correctly because it is going to be able to suppress weeds more naturally. It provides color and texture, and organic mulch, again, is going to break down. Now, with mulch, I never recommend the dyed mulch, but not because it's dyed. It's because dyed mulch tends to be made from recycled wood that is very, very dry, and it can actually pull nutrients out of your soil, then put them back in. And depending on what that recycled wood is, there could be chemicals that leach into your soil as well. So you just want to be cognizant of what it is you're purchasing. We also generally don't recommend cypress mulch just because we don't know if it's sustainably harvested, and cypress trees are in really sensitive ecosystems. So going out and mass harvesting cypress mulch isn't something that we recommend. But Melaleuca mulch is made from an invasive plant that is also a great option and has some natural insect repellents in it as well. When you are mulching, you want to focus on the inner donut when you're around trees. So there's this inner donut. Notice how there's not really mulch down here. When you have a freshly planted tree, this acts as a bowl to hold your water. So it holds it on that root ball that was just planted so that the water will seep in and go down to where it needs to go. You can use, again, pine straw and leaves. Depending on the leaves, you can still kind of get that berm effect. Pine straw isn't as good at the berm effect. So pine straw on newly planted trees isn't as effective at holding the water in place. For that, you would have to make sure you had some kind of berm of soil underneath. But then if you do that, you're going to have to move it later to make sure you get runoff from rain actually getting all where it needs to be for that particular tree. But what we don't want to do is volcano mulch like this. So we're suffocating our roots here. We are increasing the chance of having rot issues around the trunk. So what I like to remind people is most people like donuts, right? They're tasty. We enjoy them. We like donuts. Most of us aren't willing to jump into an active volcano, right? Volcanoes are going to hurt things. So think volcano mulching is going to hurt it. Donut, tasty, yummy, wonderful help for that particular tree. We're not going with the health of the donut though, okay? So we don't want volcanoes. We do like donut rings. In general, you're looking at 2 to 3 inches of mulch and create, again, that berm. And once trees are hitting their adult size, they really don't need much mulch. You're really just mulching around to keep weed whackers and mowers from hitting the trunk and causing damage. So our next principle is attracting wildlife. So for this, I'm going to talk for just a second about diversity within our urban landscapes. We do recommend following the 30-20-10 rule, which we're terrible at in Florida. We have a very limited palette in most of our urban settings. So ideally, we want no more than 30% of our plants in our urban forest from one plant family, no more than 20% from one plant genus, and no more than 10% from one plant species. So as an example, if we were doing this with oaks, it would be no more than 30% from the family Fagaceae, no more than 20% from the genus Quercus, and no more than 10% of Quercus virginiana, which is the most commonly planted oak that we have in the state. And by increasing our diversity, we're going to increase the diversity of animals that we can attract. And oaks are vitally important in our urban settings. We just need to mix up the species that we have. Okay. Now, in general, for creating habitat, it's advised to limit lawn because lawn is not great habitat for most wildlife. Lawn's great for certain wildlife, but we consider that wildlife pests, and most people don't like those, right? So again, diversity in your landscape is going to attract more pests. You want to make sure you have host and nectar plants available, and generally trying to mimic natural ecotones where you have canopy, understory, some sort of mid or shrub layer, and then more clumping and more native grasses as well. Now, there are perfectly wonderful places to have turf as well, but if you're trying to attract wildlife, you definitely want to limit the turf in your particular landscape. Now, native, some of the things that you can attract, we do have a number of birds. I don't know all of these songbirds listed here. There are 500 species of songbirds in the state that you can attract. We also have a large amount of different mammals that we can attract. We have several different species of bats. We have 13 different species of bats. We do have flying squirrels, which is just a flying squirrel right here, plus regular squirrels. We have our native possum or opossum. These are the only native marsupial to the United States. They're immune to rabies, and they eat a lot of insects and ticks. So they're really great to have around to actually keep us all a little bit safer from different tick diseases. We do have raccoons, fox squirrels down here. There's a lot of other mammals, and I know that some of the mammals that would attract are mammals that we don't want, and that's where within our next principle, you need to think about managing yard pests responsibly as well. Now, within our trees, we have a number of trees that actually use, a number of caterpillars and butterflies that use trees specifically as host species. So eastern tiger swallowtail, you're going to find on a lot on sweet bay magnolias. We've got our giant swallowtail that really loves a lot of citrus and also Hercules club. Tussock moth you'll find on oaks and maples, and then our Luna moth you're going to see on hickories, willows, maples, sweet gums, persimmon, and beech. But because these are all relatively large trees, you won't actually see the caterpillars super frequently until they're coming down to actually go ahead and go through their metamorphosis. Our trees are also home to a number of different tree frog species. And we have a lot of other wildlife. If there's wildlife I haven't mentioned that you love and you want to shout it out in the chat, feel free to do so. But as I said, next up, we're moving into principle number 6, which is managing our yard pests responsibly. So when we're talking about managing our yard pests, we're really talking about integrated pest management and the pest management period, where the last option is going with the hardcore chemicals for managing. So we want to start with what we call cultural controls. So that is buying healthy plants, making sure we put the right plant in the right place, and then making sure we're sanitizing our tools while we're out there. So if we're dealing with the plant that has a disease, we don't transmit it to another plant. So additional cultural controls include scouting. So you're out there on a regular basis checking your plants to see if there are pests on it. You want to identify the insects and eggs that you find to determine if they are pests. And then you want to set a threshold of damage. Outside is outside, right? It's an ecosystem. You're never going to be 100% free of pests. But what you want to do is figure out at what point do you start managing for those pests. Okay. Now, with trees specifically, there's one more specific cultural control, and that is prune correctly to reduce damage, because that's going to reduce diseases and pests being able to get in. These are not appropriate pruning cuts. The first one is a massive flush cut. This cut is almost as large as the tree. And it takes, for a proper cut on a tree to heal, it's about 1 year per diameter of wound. This is an improper cut, so that's going to take even longer to heal over. And that just gives more and more time for the plant to get infected. And at this point, this is trunk tissue that's exposed, which it's a lot harder for the tree to protect itself once we've gotten there. And this is an included bark. So this was a bad branch attachment that just broke over time. And with that in mind, I just want to show you this because what we have is our trunk wood in the middle and the branch wood. So they are separate. So we have what's referred to this branch bark collar here. So when we prune, we really want to prune from here, about from here to here. It's a bit of an angle because that's going to heal quickest, because the healing tissue comes from the trunk tissue that's here. Whereas if we leave something out like this, or we leave something out, it's going to increase the chance of rot being able to get in. But also if we flush cut like this, we've cut straight into the trunk and we're just inviting pests and diseases to kind of come in and cause more damage. We do have that 3-cut method when you're pruning the trees with this culture, with any method for trees. You do an undercut first. That undercut is to prevent, as you're cutting the second cut with the majority of the weight, you don't want this ripping back and ripping the bark down. So that second cut prevents that. So you're going to cut about 12 inches from the base of the trunk to reduce that. You're going to cut further away. It's your top cut. It's going to take most of the weight off. And then your final cut is going to be along that branch bark collar right here. Now, each tree is different. Some kind of show you where it is with a little bit of swelling. Some don't. Just know that you're never straight up and down. You're always at an angle and you're never directly next to the trunk for that final cut. So after your cultural, you're looking more at the physical or mechanical. So this can be hand removal. Right now we have lubbers, so you might be taking them off and kind of manually squashing them. You can trim out issues when possible. So if you have a plant that has a large amount of mealybugs on it, it might be better to just like trim that off and then try to, manage why the mealybugs are coming in. You can have traps as well. And then you can also set up physical barriers. And those are usually more for when we're talking mammals. But you can also do it for insects as well. You can put like mesh around fruit in your garden. And, depending on what you're looking at, depends on what that barrier is going to look like. The next step up that pyramid is looking at biological controls. And this can be predatory insects. It can also be specific kind of so BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, for managing caterpillars is kind of on the cusp of biological control versus chemical control. It's often treated like a chemical control, but because it's a bacteria, it's really more of a biological control. And the benefit of biological controls with predatory insects or with the targeted pesticides like BT, you're not killing your desired insects, right? You're not going around and just kind of killing your pollinators. You're not going around and killing the beneficial insects. You're killing the ones that are the problem and reducing their population. Remember, biological control and even chemical control is not guaranteed to be 100% effective. So remember, it's an ecosystem, and you're never going to get 100% management of your pest. You're just going to get it down to that manageable level is the ideal. So with chemical control, you have more targeted chemicals. Like I mentioned with BT, you can also use horticultural oils and insecticidal soaps. Please don't mix your own insecticidal soaps, because if you don't mix them correctly, you can actually harm your plants. A lot of times I see recipes that are that advertise mixing detergents in your insecticidal soap mix, but detergents will strip the waxy cuticle off of your leaves, which you don't want. And then you also have the option of your more conventional systemics, or your more conventional pesticides. You can have systemics, contact chemicals, but often they're non-target. Now with systemics, they're generally some sort of drench or injection that go up into the plant. And there is research that shows that that can be very negative for pollinators. So you want to be careful with how you're using that and what time of year you're using it to try to reduce the damage to those non-target species. All right, moving up next, we're going to be looking at recycling yard waste. When we're looking at it in urban settings, it's a little bit more complicated. If you're able to compost on site, that's great. But if you are, a contractor, you could actually offer mulch services to homeowners. Either, you're cutting somebody's tree down that's, doesn't have any kind of diseases that can affect anything else on the property. You might be able to mulch it up and put it down exactly where you're at. Now, if you have significantly diseased trees and palms, do not use those as mulch chips. You need to incinerate them so you're not spreading the diseases further. And in general, I hesitate to ever say that it's a good idea to mulch up palms and put them down as mulch, just because we have Ganoderma butt rot, which is a disease that will impact palms even after they've been cut down. So you don't want that transmitting to healthy palms in the area. So make sure whatever you're putting down is from a healthy plant. And if you're the contractor, you want to educate the homeowners on what's going to be best for their site. But you can use a lot of the mulch created from that waste in landscape areas as well. Again, if you're a homeowner and you're able to compost, that is kind of ideal, because you're composting what's in your area and the nutrients you've already put down in the form of fertilizer, you're then recycling back into your landscape. Now, if you're a contractor, this might be a little bit more difficult. You could potentially set yourself up for kind of a side business of composting and then selling your compost, or using it in additionally within your landscape practices. You can also talk about community gardens that you might be able to drop some of the chips off or the debris off so that they can compost it as well. If you're looking for free mulch or reduced mulch, a lot of times we have utility mulch available for free that can have undesired plants or invasive seeds in it. So that's more if you want to be kind of careful with where you're using that. I wouldn't recommend utility mulch in landscape beds, but if you have like a sandy area that you're trying to like drive cars on or something, it could work in those areas. You can also look at donating wood chips to schools, parks, nonprofits, and some municipalities also do composting. Otherwise, a lot of times yard waste is chipped up and used at landfills to actually cover the landfills at night, because each night the landfill must be covered so that trash doesn't just go kind of blowing around in the wind. Now, storm recovery, it's important to know what's going on during storm recovery for mulch. Because, I mean, we live in Florida, we have a lot of hurricanes, and that can lead to a lot of debris. And mulch piles get very hot in the middle, and they can catch fire. So you want to make sure you know where you're managing your mulch piles from this large debris removal, and that you are wetting it and also rotating it around, because as it gets hot, it's self-composting on the inside. But I have seen, this is a picture I took of a steaming pile of compost. I did report it, and within 2 days, it did catch fire because nobody actually went out and did anything with it. But you want to make sure you're paying attention to that and aware of the risks associated with it. So 2 more principles left and they're a lot shorter. So first up is reducing that stormwater runoff. And there are a lot of creative ways to do this in urban settings and even suburban settings. So you can do things like swales, like the one in the background here, where you're collecting runoff water so that it's not going directly into lakes, that it's staying in a location and kind of percolating down into the aquifer, or going through kind of several of these before they get down to the lake so that they're getting filtered out as they go. Here are just some examples of other ways. So this is in an urban setting, and we can see a cutout here so the rainwater can come in and go in here. There's also a cutout over here. And then we have locations here that will help with aeration, and then water just kind of goes down as well. Even these street tree beds, one of the reasons that they're generally level is so that as rain is coming down the sidewalk, the beds can help absorb that water. And again, that's one of the reasons I talked about in the beginning that we are planting trees like in sidewalk beds, is to help mitigate that runoff as well. But again, don't plant in sidewalk beds unless there's room for that tree to actually grow. You can also look at municipal rain gardens, and not just municipal. Like if you have an area at the front of your property that collects a lot of rain, you could look at putting a rain garden in there as well. So they can look really pretty. Oftentimes the same plants that you would put in a rain garden are kind of swamp dwelling plants that are used to having a lot of water and then going through long periods of drought, which makes them well adapted for those locations. You can also do swales, which is a bit what I was talking about in the middle. So you have the surface water runoff coming in, some sort of wetland-like landscape planted, and then either have the water percolate down or it runs off, getting filtered along the way into a water body. So our last one is protect the waterfront. And realistically, every principle I've talked about is designed to reduce stormwater runoff and protect the waterfront. They all kind of build to these. So within the principle of protect the waterfront, we specifically talk about on the waterfront, but all these principles are designed to, again, protect them. So having trees planted around the waterfront is going to help reduce erosion. They do help absorb pollution. Another thing that you can do here is the recommended no maintenance buffer, that's 10 to 20 feet. Your county may have a specific ordinance related to that. So make sure you check on that. Within our green industry best management practices, we do talk about 10 to 20 feet away, just not having maintenance so that you're not putting anything too close to the water. But having things planted around, ideally native plants, is good too. This is a great place for our cypress trees. That is what they're there for. They are excellent at helping reduce erosion. They're excellent at helping to, clean water as it's going in as well. And planting natives, like a native buffer, is also good because you're creating habitat, but you're also having a larger amount of plants that are helping to filter that water as it's coming in. So it's that water filtration. So that was quite a lot, but can you guys think of any other ways Florida-friendly landscaping connects to urban forestry? And Michael, the source table, I think that popped up while I was talking about the watering. I'm going to have to go, I made that table and I have to go back and see which sources I used for it because I pulled it from a lot of different locations. I'm trying to figure out what that actually was. Some of them were UF resources, some of them were urban forestry resources. So if you guys can think of any other ways to connect Florida-friendly landscaping to urban forestry, write it in the chat. Otherwise, it is time for questions, and there's my contact info. And John, you can tell me, that's a QR code to my survey, but I can also just put a link in the chat or email it to you. And thank you guys.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get the link for that
I'll
and
email you
share it in
then.
the email as well.
Sounds good.
So, um, water in urban forestry and trees. I don't know. The one that comes to mind for me is leaf area index, like slash water. I mean, that's taken up by the leaves in like a rain event, like in that being ecosystem service, like in it manages hydrology. particularly like with all the impermeable surface that we have in urban areas.
Yeah. They also really do help reduce costs related to energy use with the shade they provide.
Yeah, um, definitely not going away as we enter the summer months here. So,
No, it's definitely not.
so yeah, has anyone got any questions? I mean, I feel like I don't know. One of the big takeaways I think of here between the two is like that it's kind of scale, like between like the properties like that are managed a lot of the times for Florida friendly and like that's the way that we think about it a lot of the time, um but then urban forestry is like it's about big areas typically. And then arboriculture is like one individual tree at a
Hmm.
time. So I don't know. That's how I kind of and like obviously like there's best management like practices for each of those scales and that but they all kind of interlink with each other. It's kind of
They
what
do, because it's like you and I were arborists, so we can look at one tree and figure it out. But then, like you said, urban forestry, it's a step up scale where urban forestry really includes all green plants in an urban setting. It doesn't have to be a tree. It can be the shrubs. It can be understory. It's really looking at the ecosystem of that urban setting. And to me, that's where Florida Friendly Landscape is really looking at that kind of ecosystem level. And it's all right there, like I showed, right? Everything's there. There's different things to think about and say, because I have some professionals that'll say, oh, Florida Friendly Landscaping doesn't mean anything to me, which is kind of what triggered me to do this because it really does, because you're working in it all the time.
yeah, it should. I mean, and I mean, yeah, there's a reason why I mean, from the extension perspective, like all horticulture agents are kind of technically Florida friendly agents too.
Yep, that is for sure.
So
I'm just the Florida Friendly agent that links um that I'm just the urban forestry agent that links Florida Friendly landscape principles together.
yes, yeah, no, which is important. Yeah, big picture stuff. So, oh, okay, here's one. Wetlands, like in the chat here. What about where do they fit in?
Well, wetlands in well, okay, so we can do artificial wetlands with like the swales, right, for reducing runoff. But it also depends on your area. If you have an urban area that has native wetlands, that would be part of it. But I need more context than just wetlands. Like, what about wetlands? Because I love
Well,
wetlands.
yeah,
My
yeah.
master's degree involved wetlands. I just need to know what. Well, we don't really have bogs so much in Florida. Not as much. Not as much. But um, ideally, those aren't getting paid. Like, we're not paving those over with parking lots because they're very important for our hydrological cycles.
Just looking at the chat here too. There were a couple questions that one of them was related to what does the planting distance mean? And we'd have to go back and specifically look at
Yeah,
like
I
which
actually
slides. But I mean,
I caught, so I had the chat up on a monitor right here while I was talking, and I caught that as I started to explain that. So I
yeah,
think I already covered that one.
okay. And you got the one too with the table question.
I'm pretty sure that table question was related to the watering table.
Okay,
And that's where I said I used UF resources, I used other urban forestry resources, but I would have to go back and look and see exactly which resources I used that I compiled to put it all together.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michelle is on here too. So sweet. Well, that worked out pretty well, like having that setup that you have.
Nice.
Well, I mean, it's almost one, so I guess everybody heads up. I'll get back to you hopefully later this afternoon with the recording, a link to the recording, and then also a link to the survey that was up earlier. So if you've not done the survey, definitely please do that for Jamie and I. Um, we run on surveys here in Extension,
We
so.
do.
So we're deep in the data right now, actually, both of us. But anyway, um, thank you, Jamie, for being here and connecting all these things like that we do and like that we're passionate and care about and look forward to doing more of these down the road with you here.
Yeah, thank you. And I know we're going to do a lot more with trees coming up. So
Yeah.
thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. And enjoy. I'm hoping most people have a long weekend coming up. So enjoy your long weekends.
Yeah. Take care.